the dark, kindle the spark in me. Let me ask you a question. How do you carve your life up into little pieces, and how do you decide who gets what piece or how big a slice they get? If you've ever found yourself wrestling with a question like that, maybe staring at your calendar and looking at how you divide your time, or thinking about your energy and where it all goes and all the different people or causes or needs that get claims on your time, maybe you know where that question is coming from in my heart. So here in today's latest episode of Flicker, I want to ask you to think with me about what Jesus maybe has to say about our divided loves and our divided selves, and how we so easily, maybe thinking we have no other choice, give little pieces of ourselves away rather than giving our whole selves to God and letting that reorient everything else. We've been walking our way through what we call the Sermon on the Mount, from what we call the Gospel of Matthew in the 6th chapter. And Jesus says this: "No one can serve two masters, for a slave will either hate the one and love the other, or be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and wealth." Simple enough, right? Now, obviously, Jesus lives in an era and in a culture in which slavery was part of sort of just the fabric of society. And it was in a lot of ways different than what slavery looked like in American history. It wasn't simply chattel slavery. It wasn't race-based slavery. You could end up a debt slave. You could be conquered by the Romans and sold into slavery as a prisoner of war. There were lots of ways you could end up there. The central thing, not to get hung up on the imagery of being a slave or a master, is this idea of who do we give our allegiance to? Who do we give our loyalty? Who do we give our love and ourselves to? So instead of us getting hung up on the idea of servants and slaves and masters, okay, the central idea, you can't divide your love up into a million different pieces and not feel like you're going schizophrenic in your soul, being pulled in a million different directions, split down to your deepest self. And yet, so much of our life teaches us to do just that, to chase after a million different things and assume you can have them all, and that chasing after having all of them, money and power and success and fame, and somewhere along the way, maybe God gets a little piece of it. In so many ways, we're taught to live that way. No wonder we feel exhausted. No wonder it feels like we can never arrive at something that feels like peace or contentment, because that's a losing game, right? In so many ways, we're taught to do something like this. A dear saint made this as a gift for me once upon a time. It's cut out of wood. It looks like a heart from a distance, but it's got letters cut out of it. The words, the letter L-O-V-E for love are in there. And it seems to me like in so many ways we are taught to do something like this, to take this whole self that's you and me, and to give out little pieces of it and say, okay, well, my job, I've got to give a big chunk of my life to my job, and to success, to career, making money, that kind of thing, and then a piece of it goes over here to my social life, and this piece over here, maybe that goes to my hobbies, and maybe I've got I'll give you a V. You can have the V of my life, and then no wonder we end up feeling like we got holes in ourselves, because we've been taught to do that, to chase after, to go giving ourselves, giving our heart, giving our allegiance, what we serve and what we love, what we are devoted to a bunch of different things. And we feel upset then when we can't deal with how they come in conflict, because to be honest, some things are going to come into conflict with one another. If my goal in life is to make as much money as possible, that's going to run up against the way of God, who seems to be more interested in how I take care of my neighbor, or how I use my resources for the good of other people, even if it means I don't make as much profit as I could. If I live my life in constant pursuit of more pleasure, or going to get more and more different experiences, to experience as much of the world as possible, I may miss that God's calling me to some moment, some special thing right here in my ordinary everyday life. At some point, we have to be prepared to know that the pieces of ourselves we give to God and the pieces of ourselves that go to career or money or job security or family or hobby or whatever, these things sometimes run into each other. And Jesus just sort of boils down. At some point you have to decide, Who gets your allegiance? Who gets your love? This is why back in what we call the book of Deuteronomy, when the people of Israel are given the law one more time before they enter into the promised land, as the storytelling goes, the commandment that Israel held on to as its central identity goes like this. Hear, O Israel, the Lord your God is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and all your strength and all your mind. And when Jesus is later asked about that commandment, he adds and says, yeah, that's the central commandment. And the second part of that is like it, love your neighbor as yourself. Jesus seems to think love of neighbor is a way of loving God, but that we are called to love God with our whole selves instead of trying to divide my heart up into you get this piece, you get this piece, you get this piece, you get this piece. It's like the old Bob Dylan song goes, you got to serve someone. There's no choice in this life. There really is no option of a directionless life with no allegiances. You're going to give your heart to something or someone. The question ultimately is whether we keep trying to play this losing game of cutting ourselves up into little pieces and wondering why nobody is satisfied when all I ever do is give them an L or an E, and why I feel empty inside when I do that. Or maybe we could do what those ancient voices of faith from Moses on have been telling us to do, and to quit cutting ourselves up, our lives, our hearts, our loves into little pieces, and instead to love with our whole selves again. This is what the goal is. This is what the goal was all along. God isn't trying to make us suffer. God wants us to be whole. And when ourselves are given completely and fully to God, that allows me now to love my neighbor, because loving my neighbor is a way of how I love God. These are not separate things. I don't have to cut out a piece and go, all right, you get this much and you get this much. To be in relationship, to love our neighbor, is part of how we love God. And when my central concern is how do I love God rightly, all of a sudden I'm not playing this game of cutting up little pieces of myself and wondering why I feel empty in the end. God takes our whole selves, our undivided whole selves, and loves us as we are and uses us as we are. That, I think, is what Jesus is up to here in this part of the Sermon on the Mount. Catch up with us next time for more here on Flickr.